Thank you for joining us, and welcome to DC Dialogues. DC Dialogues is our open forum where we discuss current events and issues we find compelling. And then we grab some really smart people and have a thoughtful discussion, fairly uncensored. So without further ado, here's your host, Bix Hirigoyen.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back. As always, I'm Bix at Decision Council, and today I'm very excited to welcome in our next newest virtual guest, Grace McCamy.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Of course, we're glad to have you on. And the subject of today's conversation is going to be the world of politics. Now, Grace is well versed in this world. She has been working in this realm since graduation from Vanderbilt University and wanted to kind of get her perspective on how things are moving and shaking in the world of government today. So first question for you, Grace, right off the bat is something that's on everyone's mind nowadays, especially in the current political climate. When you come across someone that vehemently disagrees with you, that doesn't share your point of view, what is the strategy to approach that conversation in a way that's actually going to be helpful in the long run?
Super good and very, very important question. And I think, for me, like you said, I joined politics. I joined campaigns actually right after I graduated from college. And part of what I was looking to work on the 2020 election cycle, obviously an incredibly important election for our country. But I was also looking to hone that exact skill, like to think about how I talk to people who don't think the same way as me, because I hadn't been pushed to do that very much. Certainly not, further than behind a screen, rather. In growing up in middle school and high school and college, like I felt like I'd just been in this bubble of people who often thought a lot like me, especially when it comes to politics. And I spent the past couple of years living in Iowa and then living in Arizona, both places where I met a whole lot of people that think very, very differently than I do. And I think the number one thing that I did to try and get past those initial barriers, because there are a lot of ways that people think, especially in politics right now. We know how divided it is on a partisan level, where I say, if you think this way, how can I be aligned with you? How can I think the same way as you? How can we all be on the same page? And the truth of the matter is there are so many commonalities in our human experience. And so what I've always found, politics is such a large bubble and such a large word and such a nasty word to some people at this point. But what it is a set of issues that people are concerned about because it impacts their lives and their families and their towns, right? And we're working all collectively to make it a better place, a better country, make our system work better, make us live up to our values more. And I always find that getting past the initial gloss and finding issues that you both think the same way about, or that both impact you in certain ways. So be it healthcare, or be it climate, or be it, gun safety, there's so many different education. There's so many different areas that no matter your political leaning, we've all had experiences and have been impacted by our political system in some way or another. And I think that even if you don't ultimately agree on what the final solution should be, we have a lot of shared experiences in terms of things that we've struggled with, things our families have gone through, things we ourselves have gone through. And to me, the best way to start that conversation is to be honest and dig deep as fellow human beings. Now, much harder to do when you're behind a screen. And unfortunately, a lot of these conversations these days happen on Facebook or start on Facebook, never end, or on, TikTok, I guess, these days. I'm not sure, but that's a problem because it's so easy to have little sound bites, small headlines, hear one little sentence, say, oh, that person is X, that person thinks this, without really actually engaging them in real conversation. And so for me, such an important part of being successful in talking to, Arizona's 30% independent voters. So part of talking to people and getting through the noise of Democrat versus Republican and having them turn out to vote for politicians that I believed were going to serve their best interests was exactly that, making sure that we connected on certain human level issues, connected as human beings and as Americans, and went from there in terms of talking about why we each believe the things that we do at this moment and how we can maybe progress to come to some disagreements and come to some agreements and go from there. But finding that human connection is so important.
Give us the complete rundown of where you have been and the campaigns that you have helped on over the last several months, year or so.
Well, the first campaign I ever joined was my campaign to be student body president with Bix Hirigoyen here for our high school. We served as student body presidents. That's where my real political career started now. I was interning and volunteering on Phil Bredesen's campaign when he was running for Senate my senior year of high school. So that's, of college in Nashville. So that's actually where I first got involved in campaigns. I joined Kamala Harris's presidential campaign in Iowa from, July to December. I joined the Biden campaign and the Mark Kelly campaign as the coordinated Arizona campaign in Arizona. I then went to Georgia for the runoff. And the last thing I've been working on up until the inauguration was the presidential inaugural committee. So working on the National Day of Service that we held the couple days before the inauguration and bringing together volunteers across the country to do service in their community.
Make no mistake about it, Grace carried that student body president duo the entire way. There is so much information out there and so much disinformation that sometimes, especially for those growing up and people that might even be in our positions, it's hard to decide what is and what isn't credible, where you should be getting your news. So what are the particular places that you generally look to get your daily news, whether it's a local newspaper, state newspaper, particular television station? Where does Grace go for her news?
So I am a big New York Times junkie, and I will say that off the bat. I love New York Times, and that's what I will often go to as my first kind of choice. But I also will read from the Wall Street Journal and Washington Post. I also, when in terms of a cable TV, which I don't watch much of, to be honest, because I find that a lot of it has to do more with what's the headline that will catch people's attention. And whenever I watch CNN, I watch Fox as well, right? I think MSNBC tends to, as a history goes, tends to be a little bit more middle of the road. But I'm not watching, One America News, because that's completely sensational disinformation, in my opinion, at this point. That said, where I go to see CNN, I see Fox as well, because it's important to see what both headlines are saying. But that's not as much news these days, I feel. Of course, big headlines come across the screen, but delving into things and seeing past that headline or a lack thereof of doing exactly that, of delving into headlines and reading past what the screen says, is part of why we have such an issue here, right? People just see one headline, take it at its, take it for what it's worth right there, and think that and get that ingrained in their head by, whoever's on the air that day. So in terms of cable TV, I try to avoid it, but I try and see both sides, and I've been watching a lot of MSNBC. And then, I read the Financial Times. Like in terms of economic news, in terms of foreign policy, I try to go more for journals and publications that are well known to give both sides of the story, and have a lot of more professionals and researchers doing that work to make sure that we're getting an unbiased view of things. So,
sure. And how do you encourage those around you? Because I imagine it's very easy for yourself and those that are living and breathing the world of politics every day to get inspired and to dig into this stuff. And even though it might take a little bit more effort to find the credible article or newspaper clipping, not everyone these days goes through that process. And so we talk about, the world of politics as being something that folks like to often shut out, especially in the forum of sports these days. Sports and entertainment are seen as an escape from what is going on. And while that might be the case for those 3 hours that particular game or concert or whatever it is happening, the reality is everyone's going to have to face the music, and politics is something that you shouldn't want to get away from. It's something that you should be interested in and shape the future of our country. So how do you make that argument to those around you to encourage voters to get involved, to encourage turnout? I know, like you spent a lot of time doing for this last election.
Yeah, I do think that finding people in government that inspire you is really important, because it's so easy. And I think, unfortunately, the media likes to make it very easy to say, government stinks. Government is not working for us. Government is a whole facade. Everyone who's there are just players on a larger game. and they're not actually working for the people. And by the way, they're all fake. That's a really easy thing for people to say.
You start getting into the dangerous conspiracy theory section of things.
Right, which is the opposite of what we need, right? Congress is shut down today because of threats of terrorism on the Capitol today. So we do not want to get to that point. But I do think that for me, I got into politics watching Kamala Harris and working for a presidential campaign. And I'd watch her come up in San Francisco, and she'd been my senator and my attorney general. And she inspires me so much. And I've gotten to know her personally because of the work that I did for her campaign, obviously. But even before that, listening to her speak, hearing what she's done, hearing her rationale for why she's pursued X, Y, or Z policy. Yours might not be Kamala Harris, but yours might be someone else who is in your state government, in your local government, your town council, or a president or a senator or a congressperson. There's so many people that I think creating that personal connection, even if you never know them, but trying to look at what they're doing and follow their story and hear their story, not just as a politician, but as a human being, an American coming in and how they've come to serve is really, really important because they're humans. They're human beings just like we are. And I think finding that humanity in people, and it doesn't take much, right? People, there are prominent politicians on both sides of the aisle that are in the news every single day, that are in every newspaper, on cable TV, doing interviews. And so listening for those and thinking, if you hear someone that you like, digging into them a little bit more. I really liked hearing that speech that X made. Let me go see about their story. Who are they? Who are they representing? What are they doing? So I do think that kind of the best you can, it doesn't take much effort, but to humanize politics for yourself a bit is helpful in giving a little bit more excitement to the issue and humanization. But beyond that, there are so many, right? Like you can subscribe to Politico Playbook, which gives you a quick, brief update of everything happening in federal government in the mornings, just like Morning Brew or The Skim but basically every newspaper has those few updates. And I'm sure a lot of people, for whichever career they're in, whichever industry they're in, subscribe to little blurbs in the morning that come in your inbox before you wake up, in whatever sector you're in. And I think that it's, even if you're not working in the political sphere, I think it's our duty as citizens to know what's happening, know what we're voting on a regular basis. Of course, not every day. Of course, you're not going to be tuned into what's happening every single moment on the floor of the Senate. But I do think it's important that major events are happening. We're all aware of what's going on and that we're tuned in because we're citizens and this is our government. It's not some other separate industry. It's not some other separate people. It's our government and we are the ones that are creating it. And these leaders are working for us. So
I'd love to know a little bit about your experience working for now Vice President Kamala Harris's campaign when this election got started a couple of years ago now, really.
Yeah.
And how did your personal journey teach you to desensationalize a lot of this stuff, like you mentioned, in terms of whether it's a specific person, if it's your political idol, and bringing them back to earth a little bit, or when you're watching the news occasionally, and unless you don't watch a lot of cable news, how do you take what you're watching with a grain of salt and continue to move down that path to a deeper level of understanding?
Yeah, so I think, I worked for Kamala Harris's campaign in Iowa. And as I'm sure many of you know, Iowa is home to the Iowa caucus, which is this legendary caucus every 4 years that is essentially, you have all the presidential candidates coming and knocking on folks' doors and saying, please caucus for me. And it's a crazy experience because you'll talk to people who are saying, well, I do like Kamala. I would think about caucusing for her, but I haven't met her yet. And you're like, well, she was in town a couple of weeks ago. And they're like, well, I couldn't go because I had something else. So I still haven't met her. So I don't think I'll be caucusing for her. So it's really a down home political arena for politicians. And I think what that does to those presidential candidates, every single one, Kamala and others, is it challenges them to sit down with people. So some of my best volunteers in Ames, Iowa, where I was working for Kamala, they did so much door knocking for her. They would go out on campus and start and talk to college kids about her. They would sit in the local coffee shop and talk to people, trying to convince people to join them in supporting her. And when she came to town, she came over to their house. They have 3 young kids, came over to their house and cooked dinner with them and had dinner with them and talked to the parents, sure, about lots of policy issues, but also talk to the kids. How do you feel? Do you feel safe at school? Like, they have just a regular conversation where these kids were learning so much about what politics means from Kamala sitting at their dinner table. So I do think that helped me kind of bring it down to earth and recognizing that, when we're talking about any political issue, we're talking about healthcare, we're talking about people's members who are dying. We're talking about COVID relief not coming to the floor because X, Y, or Z politician in society, it's not politically advantageous. So I do think that in terms of kind of desensationalizing and bringing things a little bit more back down to earth when thinking about politics, and in my own experience, it's about seeing and meeting families who, whether or not they've met the presidential candidates, who understand and have seen policy impact their lives on a daily basis, and who are thinking about the candidates they're looking to elect and the candidates they'll be voting for on what have they done to help impact my life? Because they're working for us, right? They're working for us. And so thinking about those issues and breaking down politics is not a political game, but as what are we doing to progress people's lives, families, economy, and jobs? So I do think that breaking it down to families and meeting people who have been so impacted by certain issues, certain decisions, is the most impactful way to kind of bring it back down to earth and recognize that someone like Kamala is absolutely a hero and absolutely has done so much to impact our communities. And yet she's learning every day from those kids sitting at that dinner table and vice versa about what matters and what's important for our communities right now.
How do you think we can capture that enthusiasm, that excitement, when it's not a race that's going to come down to the wire, that's going to flip the Senate, that's going to flip the people do get excited about these big moments, but at the end of the day, like you said, in local elections, it might not be a huge deal when you look at it at first, but there are a lot of interesting things happening at the local level and even nationally that maybe don't get as much coverage. So how do you make every election and every opportunity to vote feel like it did in Georgia for the most recent Senate runoff?
Absolutely. And that is such a hard thing to do. If you have the answer, let me know. It's a difficult strategy. It's a difficult thing to strategize on, because here's the thing, like you said, every election we're talking about has massive impacts on my life. If it's my local election, it's going to have sizable impacts on my life. And yet it's not as sexy to hear about the local town council race, right? It doesn't hold the same level of this is do or die. But it is for some families, and it is for some careers and some industries. And so I do think it's a lot about messaging around, it's a lot about the communication strategy around the campaign, quite frankly, because it is about what do we care about? What do we as a community care about? And what are we trying to how are we trying to hold close to those values? Which I think is part of it. But here's the thing, and I'm saying this to everyone I talked to recently, because I think a lot of people say, and this is coming from my perspective, some people may feel differently, but if you're on the other side of the political spectrum, maybe you feel differently. But here's my thought process, which is that there was an insurrection attempt, right, on January 6th. And we had already had the election. The election had been decided. The sitting president didn't want to accept the election results. He almost didn't. He finally did. We had somewhat of a peaceful transfer of power. We had an inauguration where the current president showed up. There were a whole slew of things that happened and that are continuing to happen. Like I said, Congress is out of session today because QAnon believers say that this is going to be the inauguration day for Trump. And so there are potential riots and violence at the Capitol. We're not at all out of the woods in terms of our democracy really being stable and strong. So I hope that every person who has a chance to vote in 2021 for their local election, has a chance to vote in 2022, understands that what they're voting for or not voting for, if they choose not to vote, is the sustainability and the continuation of our democracy and our democratic system. Small d democratic. I mean, our democratic principles decided and organized by our founding fathers. We're not out of the woods on that at all. Mm-hmm. I read a book recently that I would definitely recommend called How Democracies Die. And How Democracies Die details what's happened in some other countries in terms of anti-democratic leaders coming to power, and how gatekeepers in society kind of let it go because they didn't think it was that big a deal, and people didn't engage in elections, and people got bored of politics. And before you knew it, anti-democratic leaders had come to power. And then it details how in the United States, those threats have happened over time. And yet every time, gatekeepers in the United States citizens have decided to engage and decide to stop that person and vote against them. And that is in our society and our democracy right now, a lot of where we're at. We are still certainly not out of the woods in terms of our democracy being in peril. And so I do think that for folks that are thinking we're past the big election, it's not that interesting anymore, think about what's still on the line here, because there's a lot, and every vote, be it local election, state election, or federal election in the next couple of years will contribute to, do we believe this about our democracy and our society, or do we believe this? Do we value it, or do we not really care? So that's what I would say. Not to be dark. That's not exciting, and not a not a happy way to stay engaged. But it is the reality at this point. So.
Oh, definitely. And thank you for the recommendation. We'll have to add to our illustrious book collection.
Me too. It doesn't, it's not very exciting to look at How Democracies Die. It's kind of a dark title, but it's a really, really good book that I definitely recommend.
All the better. And finally, let's pretend that we have Vice President Harris's ear here listening into us. What's one thing that you would want to tell her, impart on her, if it's words of encouragement, as she is already in, but is getting ready to take on these next 4 years?
That's a great question. I am so proud to have worked for her. I am so proud of the line that she's towed as a woman of color, as a Black woman, as an Asian American woman, coming up from Oakland and coming into the roles and holding her ground, right? She has been criticized on both sides. She's been criticized for being too moderate. She's been criticized for being too liberal. She's had things thrown at her everywhere she turns, and she has stood by her values. She's worked for the people, and I am so proud to have worked for her. She's inspired me, and she is the thing I tell her, quite frankly, the thing I told her the first time I ever met her a couple of years ago was, I want to work for your campaign. That's all I want to do. I want to move to Iowa and work for your campaign. And she was like, okay, that's great. Thank you so much. You can move there. Yeah. And a couple of years later, what I would say if I saw her today is, I'm so proud of her. I would work for her in a second. And thank you for continuing to be a voice, especially for women in this country, breaking barriers, because there are so many more glass ceilings for women to break in politics and across this country and in every sector. And I am so proud to be connected to and to look up to one who's done so much already. So proud.
Well, hopefully the next generation will be looking up to you. But thank you so much, Grace, for joining us today and giving us some great perspective and having an awesome conversation. And thank you to the audience for tuning in as well. If you have any questions at all, feel free to reach out to us at Decision Council. Otherwise, we will see you next week. Thanks so much, everyone.